Hello everyone. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, close your eyes and listen closely to The Vanishing at Venner Hall. I received Holmes's telegram in the late evening, just as the gas lamps were being lit outside my consulting room. The message, like so many before it, was curiously economical in its phrasing. Venner Hall. 1 guest, 2 arrivals. Stop, depart immediately. Stop, bring revolver. S.A. Combination of words alone chilled me. By dawn the following day I was seated opposite Holmes in a private railway compartment, the countryside flashing past us in early autumn bloom. "You've heard of the Venner family?" he asked without preamble. "Landowners in Dorset," I replied. "An old line. They made their fortune in glass-making, I believe." "And illusions," Holmes said. I raised a brow. Old Arthur Venner was a master of parlour magic and automata in his youth, a curious eccentric who preferred invention to conversation. His estate reflects that nature. Full stairwells, 2-way mirrors, a hedge maze with more than one trapdoor. "And he's invited us." "He did not," Holmes replied, adjusting his coat. "His daughter did, Miss Celia Venner. It seems she's hosting a weekend gathering at the hall, and one of the guests arrived twice." "Twice?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The same man, same luggage, same name, 2 different times." Venner Hall rose from the mist like something out of a painting, turreted, ivy-covered, and curiously asymmetrical. The air was cool with a scent of damp stone and burning wood. We were met at the doors by Miss Celia Venner herself, a tall woman in her 30s, with dark eyes and an expression fixed somewhere between suspicion and desperation. "Mr. Holmes," she said, her voice low, "you must think me mad." "On the contrary," Holmes said, bowing slightly, "I find you intriguing." Inside, the hall was a museum of curiosities, anatomical clocks, brass birds in flight, portraits with no faces. The guests had gathered in the drawing-room, murmuring among themselves. Holmes surveyed them as we entered. Lord Halbridge, a pale aristocrat with rheumy eyes. Miss Lillian Greaves, a playwright from London, sharp-tongued and half-drunk. Captain Elias Grove, a retired military man with a rigid jaw. Mr. Francis Dorr, a mathematician from Oxford, who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. And then there was him, Mr. Silas Norring, and sitting beside him, Mr. Silas Norring. The room fell silent as Holmes approached the pair. Both men were identical. Same beard, same manner, same voice. "Mr. Norring," Holmes said smoothly, "might I ask which of you arrived first?" "I did," said the left one. "No," said the right. "That's false. I arrived at 5 o'clock yesterday with the luggage bearing the blue tag." "I also have a blue tag," said the left. Miss Venner looked as though she might faint. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, take notes. This may be the most unusual case of duplication we've yet encountered." After dinner, Holmes and I retired to a private study to debrief. "You saw the reaction of the other guests," Holmes said. "Not surprise, but unease, as if they expected something strange, and feared they had become part of it." "You think they're lying?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "Or acting. Miss Greaves knew Norring from before. She concealed it." "And the captain?" He checked his watch precisely 7 times during the conversation. A man used to precision, and yet he failed to notice the impossible duplicate in front of him until prompted. Holmes pulled out a set of pocket lenses and examined a scrap of cloth from one of Norring's jackets. No difference in stitching, no markings to differentiate ownership. Either we are dealing with twins posing as one man, or something far more elaborate? I hesitated. You're thinking of automata. Holmes said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. That night the storm came. Lightning streaked the sky above Venner Hall, and the wind howled through the chimneys like voices from the past. At midnight, a scream pierced the hallway. Holmes and I rushed to the second floor where the guests' rooms were kept. Miss Greaves stood at the threshold of her chamber, her hands shaking. "He's gone," she whispered. "Both of them." We entered. The beds were still made. The luggage was undisturbed, but the room was empty. Mr. Silas Norring, both versions, had vanished, and on the pillow lay a card, plain, white, unmarked, except for a single embossed phrase in fine serif print. "The guest is an illusion." We examined the guest room thoroughly. Holmes moved with crisp efficiency, checking the floorboards, window locks, and edges of the mirror. He tapped each wall twice with his cane. The room gave no answers. "No forced entry," he said, "and yet 2 grown men have vanished without a sound, in the middle of a storm. Could they have fled through the window?" I asked. Holmes peered out. A sheer drop to the hedge garden, 15 feet below, and no marks in the earth, no footprints, not even broken ivy. I turned the pillow over. The white card remained untouched. "The guest is an illusion." Holmes took it with tweezers and held it under the lamp. Embossed by hand. The typeface is called Baskerville number 4, very rare. Likely printed with a roller press, possibly in the house itself. Meaning, it was left deliberately, not brought from outside. Miss Venner stood in the hallway, eyes wide. "It wasn't there an hour ago. I cleaned that room myself." "Do you have a printing room?" Holmes asked. Her lips parted. "Yes, my father's old workroom, but it's been locked for years." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then we must go there immediately." The workroom was behind a false bookshelf in the east wing, a secret door disguised with dusty volumes of Greek classics. Miss Venner retrieved a ring of tarnished keys, her hand trembling. She opened the door. The room was larger than I expected, with tall windows shuttered from the inside. The scent of brass, ink, and old leather filled the air. A mechanical table stood in the centre, and above it, pulleys and gears crisscrossed the ceiling like cobwebs. Against the wall sat a cast-iron printing press, covered in a sheet. Holmes pulled it free. "Recently used," he muttered, pointing to smudges of ink and trimmed cardstock beneath the wheel. "Someone's been printing here." He held up a single piece of card from the discard pile. It bore the same phrase. "The guest is an illusion." We returned to the main hall to gather the guests. Only 4 remained. Lord Holbridge, Miss Greaves, Captain Grove, and Mr. Dorr. Holmes faced them like a conductor before a storm. "I will ask only once," he said. "Did any of you know Mr. Silas Norring before this weekend?" Silence. Then Miss Greaves stepped forward. "I knew of him," she said carefully. "He was a writer, a minor novelist. We met twice at the theatre." Holmes turned to Lord Holbridge. "I've seen him," the Lord muttered. "Years ago. A salon in Paris." Mr. Dorr blinked rapidly. "He sent me a letter once, asking about paradoxes. I didn't reply." Holmes smiled faintly. "Then he was not a stranger." Captain Grove growled. "I don't see the point. He's gone now." "On the contrary," Holmes said, "he may never have been here." That night I heard something peculiar, footsteps above my ceiling, slow, measured, deliberate. I rose and dressed quietly. Holmes was already awake, standing in the corridor with his lantern lit. "You heard it too?" I asked. He nodded. 3rd night in a row. We followed the sound down a hallway I had never noticed before. past portraits with hollow eyes and windows that showed no moonlight. The steps led us to a narrow stairwell spiralling up to a forgotten attic. Holmes forced the door open. Inside was darkness. And in that darkness, movement. A figure hunched over a table, a printing press. Holmes leapt forward and seized the man's arm, only to find himself holding a length of empty coat. The figure dissolved into shadow and smoke. But on the table, freshly printed, the guest returns. The next morning, the household was subdued. The storm had passed, but a grey mist now clung to Venner Hall like cobwebs spun from dread. Breakfast was silent, save for the scrape of silverware and the occasional cough from Lord Holbridge. Holmes remained standing. He did not eat. His gaze swept the room, absorbing it all. Body language, glances, absences. Then he said, simply, "There were 7 guests." A pause. Captain Grove scowled. "There are 5 of us now." "Correct, but there were 7. Miss Venner confirms it. 6 invited and Mr. Norring. And yet, the names don't match, because one of you isn't who you claim." Everyone froze. Holmes turned to Miss Venner. "May I see the guest list?" She retrieved it from her writing desk, a folded parchment, hand-lettered. Miss Lillian Greaves, Lord Ernest Holbridge, Captain Elias Grove, Mr. Francis Daw, Mr. Silas Norring, Mr. Julius Prine. Holmes tapped the 6th name. "Who is Julius Prine?" Miss Venner paled. "He never arrived." "No," Holmes said. "He did, but he arrived under another name." He turned to the guests. "One of you is Julius Prine masquerading." Mr. Dawes' hands trembled. Miss Greaves's wine-glass tipped, and then Lord Holbridge rose slowly. "This is absurd." "What does it matter now?" Holmes's tone was clipped. "It matters because Priner was an illusionist, a disgraced stage magician with a record of theft, fraud, and psychological manipulation. He vanished 3 years ago, presumed dead." Captain Grove barked a laugh. "You think he's here? In disguise?" Holmes said nothing, but his eyes never left Lord Holbridge. Later that day we explored the East Corridor, a part of the house sealed off for renovations. Miss Venner hadn't entered it in years. The walls bore odd indentations, frames removed, wallpaper torn. Then we found it, a portrait, lying face down behind a cabinet. Holmes turned it over carefully. It was a double portrait, 2 men standing beside each other. Both were Silas Norring. "Painted in oil," Holmes murmured. "No 2 people ever pose identically unless instructed. This wasn't a photograph or mimicry. It was staged." On the back of the canvas was a tag, "Portrait of Julius and Silas, 1889. Miss Venner gasped. "Twins!" "No," Holmes said. "Reflections." That night Miss Greaves vanished. Her bed was unslept in. Her room was empty. On the window pane, drawn in fog, "The play is not yet finished." We gathered the remaining guests in the music hall. Holmes now held command over the house. "There is no Julius and Silas," he declared. "They are the same man. Or more accurately, one is the product of the other's obsession." He turned to Mr. Daw. "You knew them both?" Daw's lips parted. "Yes, in university. Silas was brilliant but unstable. He spoke often of creating a second self, a man who could take the blame. He blamed Julius for everything." "Did Julius exist?" Daw's voice shook. No one could tell. Holmes nodded. He trained himself to shift identities at will. Voice, manner, even memory, a perfect illusion. Captain Grove rose. "Then which one did we meet?" Holmes's voice was low. "That's what we're about to find out." Later that night, Holmes instructed me to sit silently in the library while he ascended once more to the attic. I obeyed, but at the stroke of midnight I heard something strange. A piano note, soft and broken. I followed the sound to the music hall. The grand piano was open, and seated before it, Silas Norring, or Julius Prine, or both. He did not turn. "You've come," he said. I did not speak. "I tried to end him, you know," he whispered, "but he's always with me, behind every mirror, in every echo." I stepped forward. "Who are you?" He turned slowly, and his face changed, one side smiling, the other blank. "You already know." Then he vanished into the shadows of the hall, as if the house itself swallowed him whole. On the piano bench was another card. This one read, "The mask never leaves the following morning. Holmes did not descend for tea." I found him in the study, motionless, seated before the hearth with the thin volume in his hand. On the desk beside him, the card from the piano bench. "The mask never leaves." "Prine is fragmenting," Holmes said, without looking up. "The illusion is slipping. He cannot tell which identity is the original." "Is he dangerous?" "To himself, yes. To others, likely more." I leaned closer. "Then we should alert the constabulary." Holmes shook his head. "Number. The moment we introduce the outer world, the illusion hardens. He will vanish again. We must solve the riddle here, within his constructed space." "And what of Miss Greaves?" "Taken," Holmes said flatly. "Or more precisely, she was persuaded to disappear, perhaps convinced she was part of the fiction. She was a playwright, after all. Prine knows how to cast roles." He rose suddenly and opened a drawer in the cabinet. From it, he pulled a small brass device, a pocket-sized clock with no hands, only a winding key and a faint click every few seconds. "I found this in the attic," he said. "It ticks, in reverse." He wound it once. Tick, tick, tick. Each click reversed the position of the internal cogs. "It's a timekeeper," Holmes muttered, "but one that doesn't mark time. It denies it." We began a new search of the house. Miss Venner granted Holmes full access to her father's old inventions, including the subterraneum, a spiral staircase that descended below the foundations of the hall into a series of mechanical chambers used for experimentation. Holmes led the way, lantern in hand. "The deeper we go," he said, "the more theatrical this becomes. Prine wants us to descend, both literally and psychologically. He is building to a finale." The basement was a marvel of gears and pipes, old copper wires and pressure valves. Along the walls were chalk diagrams of faces, eyes, half-finished sketches of masks, and cryptic phrases in Latin. "Nocite ipsum fiat lux illud non est verum." "What do they mean?" I asked. "Know thyself. Let there be light." "That is not true." Holmes turned to me. "He's building a philosophical trap. Not just a deception of vision, but of identity. What is real, and what is reflection?" Just then we heard it. Laughter. A child's laughter. High, distant, echoing. We followed the sound through a narrow hallway until we reached a door lined with black velvet. Holmes opened it slowly. Inside, the room was circular, with mirrors on all sides. It was lit by a single gas lamp suspended from the ceiling, and at the centre stood a pedestal with a mask. Porcelain, smooth, featureless. Holmes picked it up. The laughter stopped. That night, Miss Venner gathered what was left of the household in the west parlour. "I must ask you all," she said, her voice shaking. "Are you real?" No one answered. Holmes stepped forward. "Let me ask instead. Have any of you seen your own reflection since arriving?" Lord Hulbridge blinked. "Of course I have," but then paused. Captain Grove frowned. "Now that you mention it." Mr. Daw said nothing. Holmes turned to a nearby mirror and pulled the velvet curtain aside. It reflected only the room, not a single person within it. No Holmes, no Watson, no Miss Venner, not even the lamp. Later, in our rooms, Holmes explained. Prine's trap is nearly perfect, he said. By denying the reflection, he makes us doubt we are here at all. It's the inverse of illusion, not a projection but an erasure. And if we're not being reflected, then, in his world, we don't exist. He held up the porcelain mask, which means we must beat him at his own game. At midnight, Holmes did the unthinkable. He sat at the grand piano and began to play, low chords, dissonant intervals, a rhythm that mirrored the ticking of the backward clock. The house responded, the lights dimmed, the walls seemed to breathe, and from the upper balcony a figure appeared, the man in the black coat, Julius Prine. He descended the stairs slowly, face shadowed, moving like a puppet without strings. When he reached the landing, Holmes stood. "Tell me," Holmes said calmly, "which face are you wearing tonight?" Prine's voice was quiet. "The one you gave me." Then he pulled the porcelain mask from his coat and pressed it to his face, and vanished into smoke. On the piano bench lay another card. "The clock is yourself." "Do you believe in shared hallucinations, Watson?" Holmes asked me the following morning, as we walked beneath the dripping eaves of the hedge maze outside Venner Hall. "Do I believe we can all dream the same lie?" I replied. "No." Holmes did not answer. He merely gestured to the twisted entrance of the maze, once decorative, now oppressive in the grey light. Prine's next clue is here. The mask was planted in the room of mirrors. The card about the clock, metaphorical. He believes the maze to be a mind. "And he intends for us to get lost in it?" Holmes smiled faintly. "He intends for us to find ourselves by losing everything else first." We entered. The hedges were tall, trimmed into uncanny shapes, half human, half mechanical. Statues in iron stood at corners, some missing faces, others bent into impossible poses. Every few minutes a mechanical bell rang from nowhere, shifting in tone and direction. Holmes left chalk marks along the path. After 20 minutes of circling, we reached a clearing we had not seen before. In the centre, Miss Greaves, alive, tied gently to a chair beneath a gazebo of iron and glass. She was humming to herself, a fractured melody. Holmes stepped forward, speaking softly. "Miss Greaves, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open. "He said I wrote it all," she whispered. "Every line. But I don't remember. I don't know who I am." Holmes checked her pulse. "She's drugged, not harmed, but conditioned." On her lap rested a folded parchment, a play. Title: The Guest is an Illusion. Author: L. Greaves, J. Prine. We brought her back to the hall and left her in Miss Venner's care. Holmes retreated immediately to the study, laying out the play's pages with careful hands. "It's a script," he said, "for everything that's happened. The guests, the storm, the disappearance. Every detail was written before it occurred." I stood over his shoulder and read a line aloud. "Doctor. Watson descends the staircase as thunder breaks above." I looked to the window. Rain had just begun again. Holmes's fingers tightened. "It's not prophecy," he said. "It's control. Prine is rewriting reality by convincing others to believe in the fiction. Each person adds weight to the lie. Consensus becomes truth." He paused. "Watson, you must promise me something." "Anything. If I begin to forget who I am, remind me." I nodded. Then I noticed something chilling. The next page of the script ended with a line I hadn't spoken yet. I nodded. Then I noticed something chilling. We found Captain Grove the next morning, dead, slumped over a table in the drawing room, a mirror clutched in his hand. The glass was cracked, but faintly etched into its surface were the words, "No reflection remains." Holmes examined the scene in silence. "He cracked," he said finally. "Quite literally. His identity eroded piece by piece. He must have tried to prove he existed by force." There was no blood, no signs of violence, just absence. He had simply faded. We buried him beneath the old oak on the east lawn. Miss Venner wept. Mr. Dorr refused to speak. Holmes, meanwhile, locked himself in the study for hours, transcribing the script line by line into a cipher. That evening he called me in. "There's a pattern," he said. "The play isn't just a narrative. It's an overlay, a map." He pointed to 3 sections of dialogue. Each aligns with a chamber below the hall, beneath the subterraneum. Prine left coordinates buried in fiction. Why? Because that's where he's hiding the original mask. The first lie, the source of the illusion. At midnight we descended once more, this time beyond the printed maps, beyond the known rooms. The passage narrowed into stone corridors lit by low gas lamps. Holmes moved swiftly, following a rhythm I could not hear. We reached a final door, iron, with no handle. Instead, a phrase etched deep into the metal. "I am the one who watches Holmes," pressed the porcelain mask to the surface. The door opened. Inside was a small chamber, bare, save for a single chair and a pane of black glass mounted on the wall. Seated in the chair, Julius Prine, or Silas, or someone in between. Holmes stepped forward. "You've built a world where nothing is certain, but certainty isn't the enemy of wonder." Prine's voice was soft. They wanted illusions. I gave them truth disguised, and they hated it. Holmes gestured to the mirror. "What do you see?" Prine stared. "Myself, at last." Holmes placed the mask in Prine's lap, and the figure dissolved. No smoke, no flash, just gone, leaving behind only the black glass, which now reflected us both clearly. We returned to the surface at dawn. Venner Hall looked changed, though not physically. It was as if the light passed through it differently now, as if the lies that once coated its walls had begun to fade. Miss Venner met us in the foyer, still pale, still hollow-eyed, but steadier somehow. "Is it over?" she asked. Holmes didn't answer right away. He looked past her, toward the upper gallery. "No," he said finally. "The illusion has collapsed, but the play continues. Prine's gone, but his script still breathes." Miss Venner's hand trembled. "The rooms, some of them are different now. The portraits, they've changed." We followed her up the east wing staircase. She was right. The walls had rearranged themselves. Where once there had been paintings of ancestors and landscapes, now hung frames filled with names. Names etched into parchment, thousands of them. "The Hall of Names," Holmes murmured. "He's recorded every version of himself, every mask, every alias, a monument to his own instability." As we stepped closer, we saw the details. Small biographies, scribbled thoughts, places visited, people deceived. Some were fictional, others disturbingly real. "Benjamin Hawkes," I read aloud, "actor, killed in Paris." "Wait. Holmes, isn't that the man you exposed in the Opera House case?" Holmes nodded grimly. "It appears Prine was there before us." He gestured further down the hall. "Look there." A nameplate read, "Dr. John Watson," and beside it a blank frame. I stepped forward, heart pounding. The biography was mostly empty, just a few scribbled lines. He followed the story. He played his role. He believed until the end. I turned to Holmes, rattled. He's rewriting me. Holmes placed a hand on my shoulder. That's what playwrights do, Watson, but only if we let them. He pulled the nameplate from the wall and snapped it in half. The frame went dark. That evening we gathered the remaining guests. Only 3 now, Miss Venner, Lord Holbridge, and Mr. Dorr. Holmes addressed them not as suspects, but as survivors. You were drawn here, he said, not by accident, but by design. Prine chose you because you each carried a fault line, a crack, something he could press against until it broke. He turned to Holbridge. You funded his stage act years ago. The Lord flinched. He was brilliant. I didn't know he was mad. Holmes nodded. You gave him reach. Then to Dorr. You gave him theory. The idea that identity is fluid, interchangeable. You admired his mind, and never questioned what he might do with it. Dorr's hands shook. I thought he was joking. A lark. And Miss Greaves. Holmes looked up the staircase, where Miss Greaves now rested in silence. She gave him the script, not willingly, but he mined her words, twisted them. Holmes drew in a breath. But we are here still, which means we can choose. At midnight, Holmes did something extraordinary. He set fire to the Hall of Names. The flames rose quickly, consuming the false identities, the mirrored selves, the parchment masks. He stood watching the inferno, arms crossed, face unreadable. Beside him, I could not speak. Prine's real crime, Holmes said, was not illusion. It was forcing others to live within it. He turned to me. You once said that truth is a matter of fact. I did. I think, perhaps, it's more a matter of courage. The last of the names turned to ash. We departed Venner Hall at sunrise. The train took us back to London, its rhythmic clatter a comfort against the long silence. Holmes stared out the window the entire way. He said nothing until we crossed into the city limits. Then, very quietly, he murmured, Somewhere, Prine still exists. Not as a man, but as a doubt. I did not answer. I only hoped that the mirror would not forget us too. 3 weeks passed. London moved with its usual oblivious rhythm. Cabs clattered, headlines shouted. The Thames flowed black and silent. Holmes returned to his daily rituals, tobacco, violin, the newspaper. Yet there was a new quietness in him. He no longer commented aloud as he read, no longer rose suddenly with inspiration. Something of him had stayed behind at Venner Hall. One morning, as I entered the sitting room, I found him already dressed, coat buttoned, hat in hand. You've had word, I said. He held up an envelope, sealed in red wax. No name, no address, just a single line written in the familiar serif type. The guest returns at 7. I checked the mantel clock. 6:43. Where? Holmes merely said. Here. We waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, a knock came at the door. Holmes opened it. There was no one on the step, but on the threshold lay a folded coat, a bowler hat, a cane, and resting atop it a mask. Not porcelain this time, but flesh-coloured, rubber, human. Holmes picked it up with gloved fingers. Stage quality, he murmured. Expensive, almost lifelike. He turned it over. Inside, pressed into the lining, was a card. The roll is empty that night. Holmes became restless. He walked the length of Baker Street thrice before midnight. Then, without warning, he collapsed into his chair and whispered, He wants me to wear it. I looked up from my notes. Who? Prine, or whatever is left of him. He's not returning. He's inviting. To what? A vacancy. A performance. He believes that once a mask is removed, it must be replaced. I stared at the object on the table. Its eyes were blank. We took the mask to a contact Holmes had at the Lyceum Theatre, a prop master named Griggs, who had trained under Houdin. He examined the object for 20 minutes, turning it beneath different lights, stretching the rubber, sniffing the lining. Then he said, "This wasn't made. It was copied." "From what?" Holmes asked. Griggs looked at him grimly. "From someone's face." That evening, the dreams began. I found Holmes at 3 a.m., seated on the floor of his bedroom, sheets torn from the bed, mirror cracked. He stared up at me like a stranger. "I saw him," he whispered, "in my own body, speaking in my voice. He walked through my thoughts as if they were hallways." "You've been marked," I said. "He's trying to write you." "No," Holmes said. "He's trying to become me." The next morning, a second envelope arrived. No wax, just a note inside. All masks must be worn to be destroyed. Holmes looked at it for a long time. Then he rose, fetched the mask and placed it on the fire grate. We watched as the rubber blackened, twisted and melted. The flames flickered strangely. The room bent for a moment. I swear I heard my own voice say, "I'm not ready." Then it was over. 3 days passed. No more envelopes, no more cards. Holmes returned to his violin. We assumed it was done until the letter arrived from Dorset, from Miss Venner. "The hall is gone," it read. "Burned down in the night. No survivors, no cause. But before the fire, a witness saw a man step through the garden, wearing your face." Holmes closed the letter slowly. He did not speak for a long time. Then softly, "He was never trying to become me. He was trying to become known." It was a bitter January morning when Holmes informed me we were leaving London once again. He said nothing during the train ride, save to point at a headline in the Times. "Actor collapses on stage, found to be missing for 3 years." The actor was Thomas Blythe, formerly presumed dead after a disappearance from Covent Garden. He had returned suddenly, mid-performance, reciting lines from a play that no one in the audience recognised. A play with no author, no publisher. But I did. The lines were from "The Guest is an Illusion." We arrived in Brighton and made our way to the asylum by carriage. Blythe was being held in a quiet wing, restrained not for violence but for unrelenting monologues that changed voice and identity. We were granted 10 minutes. Holmes entered alone. I watched from the hall through the small observation pane. Blythe sat perfectly upright on his cot. When Holmes approached, he smiled. "Ah," he said, "the playwright returns." Holmes didn't blink. "I'm no playwright." "No," Blythe replied, "but he was. And he's left you a final scene." Holmes emerged 10 minutes later, paler than I'd seen him in years. "We go to the theatre," he said. "Which one?" He handed me a folded card. The front was blank. Inside, just a date. "That very evening," and one phrase, "the final curtain." The theatre was small, abandoned since the war. Windows boarded, interior hollowed. But inside it had been restored, as if awaiting an audience. Holmes led me to the stage. The curtains were half drawn. Behind them, in a single spotlight, stood a chair. On the chair, a book. Holmes stepped forward, picked it up. "The Guest is an Illusion," bound in black leather. Only this time it bore a new subtitle, "A Play in 8 Acts, for 2 minds and 1 ending." He turned the pages. The dialogue was unchanged until the final scene, where once there had been nothing, now read, "Holmes steps forward, alone. He removes his mask. The theatre applauds. He smiles and says, 'I was always the guest.'" Blackout. Holmes looked up. This was never his story. It was mine. That night, I found him staring at the mirror. "Do you believe," he asked, "that identity is truly singular?" "I believe you are you," I said, "and nothing will change that." He didn't answer. The next morning, he was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, just the book, open to the last page. The script ended there, but beneath it, in Holmes's hand, one final sentence had been written. The illusion is not the guest. The illusion is that the guest ever left. The days that followed Holmes's disappearance were among the strangest of my life. He had left behind no belongings, no signs of departure, only the open script and the feeling that the story was not over. Scotland Yard questioned me. I answered truthfully and was not believed. They filed Holmes's absence under voluntary disappearance. Perhaps they were right, but I could not rest. Then, one morning, I received a parcel. No address, no postmark. Inside was a key and a note. Final rehearsal. The truth is where the guest never arrived. J. I knew immediately. Venner Hall. But it had burned, hadn't it? I travelled to Dorset nonetheless. The ruins of the hall remained, a skeleton of scorched beams and blackened stone. But something was wrong. There was a new door, set deep in the cellar, behind what had once been the east wing. The key fit the lock. The door opened to a staircase spiralling down, impossibly deep, farther than any building should allow. I descended. At the base, a room, clean, intact, illuminated by oil lamps, a study, a desk, a velvet chair, and on the desk, a tape recorder, old, dusty, yet functional. I pressed play. Holmes's voice emerged, distant but steady. "If you've come this far, Watson, then you know what I feared. Prine was never alone. He was not a man. He was an idea, a contagion of thought, a self-replicating illusion. Each person who believed in him created him. That includes me. That may include you." The tape clicked, then silence, then a second voice. Mine. "Where are you, Holmes?" Click, end of recording. I sat for a long time in that chair, the idea gnawed at me. Had Holmes become Prine? Had Prine become Holmes? Or had both been roles played in sequence by the same mind? On the wall was a final card, nailed above a mirror. It read, "The one who remains wears both masks." I returned to London that night, but nothing felt the same. Our rooms on Baker Street were preserved. Dust covered Holmes's chemistry equipment. His books still dog-eared. Mrs. Hudson refused to clean them. She whispered to me. I still hear him walking sometimes, late at night, so did I. Then one night I woke with a jolt. There was someone sitting at the end of my bed. A shadow. "Holmes," I whispered. The figure didn't respond, only stood and placed a folded coat at the foot of the bed, a cane, a mask, and a final card. The play does not end when the stage empties. When I blinked, the figure was gone. Months passed. The city shifted through seasons, but the presence of the vanished guest lingered like a shadow in my mind. I remained at Baker Street, awaiting a sign, any sign that Holmes would return, or that the mystery had truly ended. One fog-laden evening, a letter arrived. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single card, thin as parchment. The guest never leaves beneath it, a folded note. "Dear Watson, if you read this, then you have survived the play. But remember, the roles we play are never finished, merely paused. I am both here and not, the guest eternal. Yours in shadow and light, S.H." I held the card for a long time, the ink seeming to shimmer under the gaslight. Suddenly the violin began playing in the next room. Holmes, or someone wearing his mask. I crossed the hall and found him seated, fingers moving deftly over the strings. He looked up and smiled. "Watson," he said, voice familiar, yet somehow strange. The play continues, and so must we. The mystery of Venner Hall had folded in upon itself, illusion and reality entwined beyond unravelling, but some truths remain eternal. That identity is a stage, and we its players. And the guest? He never truly leaves.